What's up guys, I'm on kind of a fall bank fishing mission right now, but I'll tell you one thing that is super important to me, and that is my tackle management system. This is a pretty beefy bag, but with that I can carry a lot of stuff and a lot of camera gear like I said, so I'll kind of open it up and show you a few of the baits and what we're trying to do out here in the fall to catch some bass. And I already have this off, but a rod slick is big for when you're going through the woods like this. Your guides aren't getting hung up, your line isn't getting dull. So I highly recommend a rod slick if you're going through patches of woods. I keep a couple spools of fluorocarbon. This happens to be 10 pound, and I will use that on a spinning combo, which I do have in my truck right now in case I run into some panfish, because I got a little bit of dedicated panfish stuff. I'm like ready for almost anything in the fall with this little box right here, and I can show you that. So 10 pound for maybe my spinning combos. I want to throw a Senko on my spinning rod. I want to throw, you know, a jig and a plastic out deep or on a bobber for some panfish off the brake line. And then I carry 17 pound fluorocarbon too, just as I added onto my 40 pound braid as an extension. But here are some of the baits. Chatterbaits, like I said, are awesome because they can just clobber into weeds and kind of fight through them pretty well. And you gotta have different weights, colors and sizes, I would say. Mainly I'll use a 3/8 ounce to kind of just lightly poke around in the shallows, but you can use a 1/2 ounce, fish a little deeper. You can use 1 1/4 ounce, which I would recommend to guys who are maybe down south and lack vegetation, have a little bit more wood on the bottom, maybe some rock on the bottom. You can cast this a really long ways off the bank, and you can maintain bottom contact, so that's a big deal. So 1 1/4 ounce chatterbait can be a bank fisherman's friend. Cover a lot of water with it and stay down close to the bottom, a little easier. Swim jigs, kind of a similar principle. You can fish them, you can keep your tip up and kind of pump them through that vegetation. I really like fishing them when there's still some lily pads left, because you can kind of skip over the lily pads, and when you find a little pocket, sink it. So fish will be tracking it underneath those lily pads, and once you sink it, a lot of times they'll hit it. So swim jig is super fun to fish in this kind of brittle vegetation state. A regular jig is what I was fishing a lot today, and you gotta have a couple sizes of those. 3/8 to a 1/2 I think is pretty good for when you're fishing on the bank. Again, you can maybe go up to 1 ounce if you want to maintain bottom contact and make a far cast, but a jig, and the reason I like a jig so much is because you can do so much with it. You can flip with it. So like I see a lay down, I just do a little pitch, let it hit bottom. I can pop it there on bottom. I can cast it all the way out. I can let it hit bottom and hop it back to the bank. I can use it as a swim jig. I can just throw it up in the pads and bring it back to me. You know, really good in a variety of cover. A jig is a good big fish bait in the fall as well. Now there will be some fish on top, and a frog always comes in handy when you're fishing on top. There'll still be a push of fish up shallow a lot of times. Sometimes it gets to be the warmest water that's left, and so they'll kind of gravitate to it. So you'll find a lot of fish up in the shallows, and a good way to really be completely snagless is to use a frog, right? And I have multiple jerkbaits. As the water cools down, jerkbaits are definitely a player because you can impart a lot of action. They look like a wounded baitfish, but you can let them hang for so long. So today I've just got a couple different ones. I've got some deeper build ones with a broader body. I've got a similar one here with 3 hooks, which I like on a jerkbait, a little bit shallower diving. These are both wrapless shadow wraps. Shadow wrap shad was the first one, and then a shadow wrap. And then this is an X wrap, which is a bait that you can cast a long ways, fish a little bit deeper, and has a little bit wider profile. And then this is a mega bass trick darter. Trick darter, super cool bait. A lot of action, a lot of flash on it. You can cast it pretty far for how small it is with the weight transfer system in it. 2 tungsten beads down there. And with all of this, like I said, if it's starting to really get cold, you can cast these things out there and you can really extend your cast. That bait will be out there working for a lot longer than any bait that you would just cast and wind in. So a jerkbait, like I said, like a wounded minnow or something like that, something that a fish can track. It's not moving too fast, so they don't have to expend energy to eat it. Lipless baits are awesome too. These happen to be Yozuri lipless baits. And that's another thing in the cold, just a bait that you can kind of yo-yo. You can fish it right in the grass even, because they're aerodynamic enough. You give them a good rip and they'll just rip the grass right apart. So lipless bait is another staple fall bait for sure, especially maybe before you start fishing the jerkbait heavy, but definitely later in the fall. Square bill is awesome for when, you know, a lot of times the bank is just lined with vegetation, but once that vegetation dies, what's left is these laydowns. So you can pitch a little square bill around and just knock boots, run into the limbs and whatnot, and just deflect off the remaining cover once the weeds are gone. So those are kind of some of my hard baits that I like to use. And these are all Z-Rust tackle compartments, so when I'm switching baits a lot, I take one off that's wet and I throw it in the box. I don't have to worry about it spreading rust on to the other baits. So my next box here is kind of more of a terminal box. Like I said, I got kind of ready for anything panfish stuff. Just some little tubes, some little Mr. Twisters, and then an assortment of jig head sizes and colors to fish on them. And then a couple bobber stops for a bobber. This is a clip-on one, but you do have the option to make it not a clip-on. So that kind of covers it for the panfish stuff. I always liked these baits too. Similar to a jerkbait, these sink, so you can cast them out there and let them hang out there a little bit longer for slow moving panfish. Sometimes a jig will blow by them too fast, so those are kind of a nice way to just hang and wait for a curious panfish to come up and actually try to swipe at it. I've got some weights in here, kind of just universal, little Texas rig weights, but also for bottom fishing, because I'm hitting like a milk run of lakes today, but I'm also gonna go fish a river and do some bottom fishing for maybe some walleyes or some suckers or some catfish, whatever I can catch. Another good bait to fish on bottom is a neko rig. And a neko rig is a subtle finesse bait that you can fish tight to bottom, which is good for bank fishermen, maintaining bottom contact. Moving along, I like using a Tokyo rig. A Tokyo rig is an extremely versatile bait. I can cast it and flip it. I can drag it across the bottom. I can put a variety of baits on it. So a Tokyo rig I would highly recommend for somebody who's fishing on the bank, because you can cast it a long ways. Like I said, comes with an EWG in a variety of sizes. You can get HD worm hook versions of it, a finesse version, a flipping hook version of it. So you can put almost any plastic on it and fish it. And one of the major benefits of a Tokyo rig is that you don't have fish the ability to throw the bait so much, and you don't have that big weight popping the fish's mouth open because it's below the bait, right? This is just kind of going along with the neko rig stuff. I got some neko hooks and some neko rings, BMC neko rings, that I will load up on this wacky rig tool. And then, you know, if you've got some Senkos with you, because the Senko is a super versatile bank bait. In fact, I have some here with me. A 5-inch Senko is a really good bait. Wacky rig it, neko rig it, use it as a trailer, fish it weightless, fish it Texas rig. It's just a great, great worm. And I love the density of the plastic, the original Gary Yamamoto Senkos, the Yama Senko. With that, I've got some wacky rig weights, and I will fish it weightless, but these are nice for getting down closer to bottom. They got a little weed guard on them so you can fish them in cover, and it's a really good way to fish wackies with those little weighted hooks. I got some jig heads here because I might fish swim baits, something like that, if I want to do some walleye fishing in the river that I'm going to fish later. But I can also put a swim bait on it and reel it and comb it across the bottom too. I got some different swim bait heads for that as well. I got some worm hooks. Usually I'll go with the 4 or 5/0 worm hook. Same thing with an EWG. I like going with the HD versions that are a little bit thicker shanked. So 4 and a 5/0 EWG as well. And then some Ned heads. I really like these Z-Man Ned heads, and I like using Z-Man baits on them because Elastec floats. So I've got a couple Z-Man baits with me as well. Elastec floats, so that helps kind of keep that Ned rig nice and vertical. But a Ned rig is another really finessey bottom contact type bait that is a true proven fish catcher, along with a shaky head or a jig worm. So I've got jig worm heads here and shaky heads. I can fish them just like a Ned rig if I want to fish a little bit bigger profile bait, like a worm, something like that. Then here's a variety of flipping stuff. Like I gotta have my bobber stops, my sinker stops. These are VMC sinker stops. I got a couple different weights, VMC tungsten weights, and then you'll see these tungsten cylinder weights from VMC. These are what I fish on my Tokyo rigs. I got a variety of sizes. That's another nice thing about the Tokyo rig, is that you can switch weights on them so easily without having to retire anything. You just kind of unkink that wire and put a different weight on. But just kind of a ready for everything box in the fall. I also have a terminal box with a bunch of little smaller hooks and stuff, and some beads and weird stuff for river fishing. And then, you know, this is a pretty big bag, but I also like to travel a little bit light. So, you know, if I'm going to have something that's going to be a trailer and also something that I can Texas rig and be confident in, a Zoom Z-Craw is just a great Texas rig type bait, a great trailer. It's got a flat profile and a ton of action in those kicking legs. So this is the regular Z-Craw, and then this is a Z-Craw Junior. So just having a variety of sizes. Variety of colors is great too. I usually just kind of like those more peanut butter and jelly type, huckleberry, black and blue, kind of just that darker with a little bit of mud washed into it. Here are some swim baits. Like I said, these are really cool because they look just like live minnows. There's a lot of bait fish movement right now in the fall, and I'll put those either on that VMC Moon Eye jig I was showing you, or these new hybrid swim bait jigs from VMC. They've got the screw lock on them, and baits don't go anywhere. The nice thing about the Largo shads, they were actually made for saltwater fishing, so they're super durable. So once you got them corked onto this jig head, they're not going anywhere. That's one thing I really like about it. It's not always sliding off of the shank of your hook, right? So this is just a blade crate, and this is where I keep some spinnerbaits and stuff and buzz baits. But spinnerbaits are a big deal for me always, all year long. I'm a big fan of fishing spinnerbaits. But again, kind of that wrecking ball bait that draws a lot of attention. You can push vegetation out of the way, you can fish it over wood or rocks or anything. And fish throughout the test of time have always just hated spinnerbaits. So you got to have a box full of spinnerbaits. At least I do. I bring almost the whole box full of them. So that's kind of it. This all kind of tucks neatly in here. Doesn't break my back. Pretty padded. I got all my camera gear. You could go a lot lighter if you weren't packing camera gear like I am, but in order to make this video and to make other videos, I gotta pack camera gear in. So there's kind of a look at my fall bank fishing setup. Pretty good just all around bank fishing setup, but I think I'm gonna vacate this lake. It was a little tough on me, so I'm gonna go try another one down the road and then go try the river.